The recent signing of the US-Ukraine critical minerals deal has been hailed by many as a significant diplomatic achievement. However, it still faces a number of hurdles, both in terms of technical details that need to be ironed out, as well as Russia and its uncertain response. To get a deeper understanding of the deal, its implications, and the road ahead, we are joined from Warsaw by Mariia Zolkina, a senior analyst at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Hi, Mariia, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So your overall assessment of the recently signed deal, what do you think?
I think that it has a pretty good perspective to normalize US-Ukraine relations. So this will be the main diplomatic effect out of this deal signed. However, I wouldn't overestimate its impact on Trump's attempts to find the resolution for the Russia-Ukraine war. I wouldn't overestimate its impact on security assurance or what even to speak about guarantees for Ukraine. So the main effect has already been played, basically. So Washington and Kyiv have normalized their dialogue. And we have found the way out of crisis, the culmination of which was an Oval Office a couple of months ago.
So the outstanding issues, what are they and how do you think they will be solved?
The main issue is basically that Ukraine didn't receive neither direct nor indirect guarantees from US. And I would remind the mineral deal is basically something that not Trump pressured Ukraine to sign, but that Ukraine has initiated back in September 2024 and presented at that time to both candidates, Trump and Harris. And so that was the idea that Ukraine will offer what it has to diminish all the critics and from US side and from Trump in particular, that Ukraine is just benefiting from taking for granted the aid from US. So please let's look from different perspective. It was part of so-called victory plan, which Zelensky team developed at the time and presented. But the critical part of it was to have security guarantees in exchange for access to Ukraine's critical rare materials and mineral resources. And this is something we still don't have in the text of the deal. Moreover, we don't have any indirect, let's say, assurances that this kind of security cooperation or guarantees will appear in the nearest future. However, one of the most important facts that, as far as we understand, the deal will serve for new framework for delivering weapons to Ukraine. Though it's about mineral resources, however, it's expected that all next new military aid packages from US to Ukraine will be counted as investment, as contribution of US side to this bilateral fund, which is going to be started with this deal. And Ukraine will respectively pay like indirectly for these weapons by contributing its resources or incomes coming to the budget of the fund from licenses and from extracting Ukraine's mineral resources. So this kind of latent framework, which is not discussed that actively now, for future organization and logistical internal, basically, framing how US and Ukraine will cooperate when it comes to military aid of Ukraine. Other issues, in particular, the details about the fund functioning are still under the question. And right now, there are tough discussions in Ukrainian parliament because parliament is to ratify, not American, but only Ukrainian one, is to ratify this agreement, this deal. However, Ukrainian parliamentarians criticize Ukrainian office of the president and government for not presenting the text of two additional agreements, which are mentioned in already signed mineral deal, but not presented to the public and not presented even to the members of the Ukrainian parliament. So basically, the pressure came both from Zelensky team and Trump administration, including embassy in Kyiv, US embassy in Kyiv, at the moment when they demanded that Ukrainian parliamentarians would vote being blind, basically, not just for the one text, but in fact for three texts, two out of which are not published, and are not presented even to the parliamentarians. That's kind of political pressure that Ukrainian parliament has withstand already, and Ukrainian Parliamentarian Committee on Foreign Affairs today included in the preamble of the text that they are going to be voting for. They have included the clear mentioning that they are not aware of what is in two additional documents. But anyway, what is in those documents cannot broaden the framework of already published mineral deal, cannot, present some new details of US-Ukraine cooperation, and cannot violate Ukrainian legislation. This is how Ukrainian parliament tried to respond to political pressure, because this is US president who has opportunity, responsibility to take decisions in such cases unilaterally, because he is executive power, basically. In Ukraine, the system is different, and de facto, office of the president, President Zelensky, have been benefiting from a concentration and consolidation of power in their hands during the martial law. But de facto and de jure, this is Ukrainian parliament who has more competences and responsibility in Ukrainian political system.
Well, the EU Commissioner President has cautioned that, well, if Ukraine is pressured into accepting a peace deal that doesn't fully safeguard its sovereignty and territorial sovereignty, it could embolden Putin to escalate aggression, to Ukraine again. Do you agree with her?
Yes, I totally agree with that. For that reason, I don't overestimate the very idea of having a deal about mineral resources cooperation between US and Ukraine for the resolution of the conflict with Russia. And for that reason, I do think that we will have pretty limited impact in a strategic perspective, but pretty visible short-term effect of this deal for diplomatic cooperation and for diplomatic communication between Washington and Kyiv. The second important aspect here is that we, from Ukrainian side, we still don't speak about the broader peace deal, basically for the reason we don't have a ground for that. We can't even agree a temporary, stable and sustainable ceasefire, which Russia is not responding to. Now it's a common proposal both from Washington and Kyiv about the ceasefire, and Russia is not responding. Instead, they are responding with the idea of so to say, several days ceasefire to celebrate the so-called Victories Day on 9th of May in Moscow. But yesterday and today, Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine suffered from another portion of missiles and drones attack. We do have victims again after the night. So even something Moscow is proposing on their side for a couple of days, not working because they simply doing the opposite on the ground. So we don't speak about the peace deal. For that reason, Ukraine is very cautious about any wording in other agreements or deals which are being negotiated right now between Ukraine on the one hand and American administration on the other hand. And last but not least is that Ukraine, when negotiated about the mineral resources deal, had a very strong position linked to the EU membership perspective for Ukraine. Ukraine is a candidate. Ukraine, unfortunately, is not moving towards opening the negotiations clusters, which are the process of getting closer to the full membership now, only because of Hungary, who is blackmailing Ukraine and the whole European Union with their veto. But generally, it was EU membership perspective, which played crucial role in drafting pretty constructive mineral deal with US. It directly says that in case there is a contradiction between US-Ukraine investment fund about the minerals in the future with Ukraine's obligations while Ukraine is accessing the European Union, the European Union regulations will have priority for Ukraine. That was critical because otherwise, for instance, the very first draft and couple of next ones coming from the US negotiation team, they were violating the very idea that Ukraine has to comply with you if Ukraine is moving towards membership. Now this problem is being solved.
Well, given President Trump's desire for a fast resolution and deals, do you foresee a scenario where the US could actually lose patience with the process and abandon its peace effort if no substantial progress is made soon?
Fortunately or unfortunately, I do see this as a realistic scenario. I think that lots of pressure from Washington after Trump came into power was directly and still is directly linked with personal dedication of Trump to bring what he promised before he was elected, like very quickly and speedily developed and presented peace deal, where he doesn't have significant positive dynamics for the conflict resolution yet. And I do expect that this is pretty realistic scenario, that while not having any significant advantages on this field, diplomatic field, let's say, because Russia even having so many sympathetic from US side proposals and so many compromises at the cost of Ukraine's security and Ukraine's defense, compromises proposed from US to Russia just to have Russia's formal agreement, at least for a ceasefire. And even in that, under that circumstances, Russia is still opposing even a temporary but stable ceasefire. Of course, Trump is not having the result he was hoping for. And I do expect that as he was emotionally focused and politically focused on the process before, this in the same way, he will incrementally, emotionally and politically be losing focus on Russia-Ukraine war. If this is happening, if this is what will happen, Ukraine still has two, let's say, short-term strategies, because Trump can just give up on diplomatic attempts to set up negotiation format to have a result, to have an outcome out of all these negotiations. And he can just leave alone Europe and Ukraine one-on-one with Russia, regardless of what Russia will be doing on Ukraine's battlefield and whether Russia will be presenting a security threat to European Union member states. Or Trump might turn his policy towards more sanctions, more pressure on Russia, and towards providing Ukraine with sustainable military and political aid for at least a short-term perspective. The second scenario, with more pressure on Russia, seems to be less realistic now. But this is something Kyiv and their European partners are still working on to prevent full US withdrawal from the European security and Ukraine security, let's say, umbrella. However, I would just to put a final point here. I do expect that the interest from Trump administration to find settlement for Russia-Ukraine war, those attempts will be decreased in time to come. And the most important task for Ukraine is not to sacrifice something which is of huge significance for Ukraine, not to take on Ukraine's shoulders any responsibility for unilateral asymmetrical concessions towards Russia before getting some kind of security guarantees from European partners, at least, even not US.
Well, just a last question. So Moscow said that they think that there should be direct talks between Kyiv and them. It shouldn't actually go through the USA. What is the response to that?
I don't see that Ukraine takes any ideas or any statements from Russia serious right now, like that, because I think that the general perception in Kyiv that Russia still wants to speak with Washington because they want to organize like a global deal where Russia is trying to sell out its as they presented leverage in global south in Middle East for concessions which will come from Ukraine under the pressure of Washington. So this is kind of a global puzzle, and I don't see that even after these kind of statements from Moscow, Moscow has changed its strategy, how the settlement should be found, not just between Ukraine and Russia, but generally in a broader framework, and where global players, global leaders are at the table, and those who are weaker, and here we find in this, let's say, weaker league, as they pretend, not only Ukraine, but even the European countries, even Western Europe. So they have just to accept the outcome of the global players, US and Russia negotiations. So I think that's how it's perceived in Kyiv. And I don't see that even after a couple of statements from Moscow, Ukraine has started understanding that the strategy of Russia is changing. I think that there is no changes in perception of what Russia is doing. And the last but not least in this regard is that we shouldn't forget that Russia is playing one serious and long-term game about legitimacy of Ukraine's leadership. So when they say about Ukraine and speaking with Ukraine, they always claim for 1 year and a half that Zelensky is not the legitimate president anymore, that Ukraine needs to be politically restarted, that Ukraine must conduct elections regardless of whether we have conditions for that, regardless whether we have security circumstances suitable for a normal electoral process. And only after that, allegedly, Russia, with newly elected legitimate leader, will allegedly speak about a broader peace deal. That's their strategy. So let's not forget about that when Russia states that they are ready to speak with Ukraine, but they are not ready to speak with Zelensky or anyone who is, by the way, according to Ukrainian constitution, is legitimately, legally, and groundly is in power still. So this is not just because of monopolization of power.
Mariia Zolkina, thanks so much. And it seems might still go on a long time. It doesn't seem there's a resolution very quickly.
Yes, unfortunately.
Mariia, thank you so much.
Thanks.